And a very good evening to you all. Welcome to Lansdowne at Woodbury Avenue. Thank you guys for playing the music for the last half hour. Appreciate that. And can we thank Nathaniel and Abs as well for setting all the lighting this evening. We do appreciate it. So, good evening. Our new series that we're exploring, Life's Big Questions, on the first Sunday of each month here at Woodbury Avenue. And this week, the question that we're asking is exclusive and intolerant. How can there be only one God? So an opportunity in this informal evening to ask questions later on. Michael Otts will firstly give a talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have a period of question and answers where we can really dig a little bit deeper. And any questions that you have that will come to mind, we can hopefully get answered. Before Michael comes to speak to us, I know a lot of people here at Lansdowne know Michael. Many don't. So I'd just like to ask Michael to pop up and just give a brief summary this week, Michael, of what you've done and what do you do, and let this week be an example of what you do.
Yeah, good evening. So I live here in Bournemouth, but I work with mainly university students all over Europe. And
Catholic Hindus do.
Catholic Hindus?
We get to feel guilty before hundreds of gods instead of just one.
But you're
invited.
The gods were my superheroes growing up. Hanuman, the monkey god, lifting an
If you've not bought your phone, then there's a little slip of paper that's on your chair, or it was on your chair, and there's a kind of question slip at the end that you can scribble on or tear off, or at the end you can just ask your question vocally in the kind of traditional manner. But we will do that because we think that if Christianity is worth believing, then it will stand up to the biggest questions and objections that we might have towards it. So please do feel free to ask those questions, and don't feel that we'll be offended if you want to disagree or if you want to pick up on something that you don't think has been covered. I grew up not in Bournemouth but in Leicester, and Leicester was the first city in Britain to have an ethnic majority. That means there were more people from a non-British background than from a British background living in my city, which meant that there were all sorts of different religious backgrounds represented. Within just a few minutes' walk of my house, you could go not only to a church, but to a synagogue, to a temple, to a mosque, you name it, in terms of religion, and Leicester probably has it. That meant that growing up, I was surrounded by people, not on the other side of the world, but on the other side of my classroom and the desk, who had different religious ideas. And in the light of the kind of multicultural society that we live in, you have to ask the question, how can someone claim that their way is the only way to God? How can you claim that there's only one way that's right? It might have been excusable to say that 100 years ago, when most people you would have known would have had the same worldview as you. But today, when we've got so much exposure to other ideas, how can you claim that one is right and the others are wrong? Isn't that arrogance and intolerance and bigoted? Isn't that rather exclusive? And so, particularly in Western culture today, it's really popular, isn't it, to say, it doesn't matter where you worship, it doesn't matter what you worship, it doesn't matter your religious background or your beliefs, they're all basically the same, and they'll all basically get you to the same place. They're all compatible. And that's certainly the idea that came through in that film clip we just saw, The Life of Pi, that basically they're all part of the same journey, all leading you to the same goal. We don't have to disagree, we don't have to choose, we can just kind of pick and mix and put them all together. That's really popular, isn't it? Maybe that's what you think tonight. But while it's popular to say that all religions are basically the same and all views are basically equal, I just want to ask 4 questions about that belief as we begin. Firstly, this. What is the evidence for that belief? What is the evidence for that belief? I've deliberately used that word belief, because when you say all religions are the same, or it doesn't matter what you believe, that is in itself a belief, isn't it? That is a system of thought and ideas. Now, it might be popular, certainly in the UK, to say that, but is it true? I'm often told as a Christian, you shouldn't just believe things because they're nice or popular or convenient, but because they're true, because they have evidence for them. But what is the evidence for the belief that all views are the same? It's certainly not a universally held, self-evident belief, because there are lots of people in the world who don't think that all religions are the same and that all views are equal. In fact, there are lots of people who would disagree with that. There's a philosopher called Alvin Plantinga in America, and I was watching a debate between him and a religious pluralist. That's just a technical term for someone who believes that all religions are basically compatible or equal. And this religious pluralist said to the Christian philosopher Alvin Plantinga, if you were born in Morocco, then you wouldn't be a Christian. And Alvin Plantinga said, yes, and if you were born in Morocco, you wouldn't be a religious pluralist. You see, there are lots of people in the world who don't share this idea that all religions are the same. So why should you think that you're right and they're wrong? On what basis? Here's a second question about this. What about the differences between the religions? See, you don't have to have a PhD in comparative religion to understand that there's some fairly fundamental differences when it comes to the religions out there. Even if you've done religious education at school, you'll know that they have different ideas about fairly simple things like God. Islam says there is one God. Christianity talks about one God expressed through 3 persons in the Trinity. Hinduism will talk about many gods, whereas Buddhism won't talk about God in that sense at all. They're clearly very different. They're not fundamentally similar and only superficially different. They're actually only superficially similar and they're fundamentally different. So how do we reconcile those differences? Well, one way that people often try and do it is through this illustration. I don't know whether you, when you studied religious education at school, were ever told about the elephants, okay, and the blind men. Basically, it goes like this. There's an elephant and there's some blind men. And the blind men are trying to work out what is in front of them. And so they all start feeling the elephant. One person feels its side and thinks it's a brick wall. One person feels its leg and thinks it's a tree trunk. One person feels its tail and thinks it's a rope. And we'll probably stop with the body parts there. But they're all feeling different parts of the elephant, trying to work out what it is. And they're all coming to different conclusions. And the illustration is basically saying, well, that's basically like religion. They're all grasping ultimate reality, and they're all coming to different conclusions. But it's all the same ultimate reality, really. Very popular illustration. But there are, I would suggest, at least 2 fairly major problems with the illustration. Firstly, when you think about it, they weren't all right, were they? But they were all wrong. because it wasn't a tree or a rope or a brick wall, it was an elephant. They were completely kind of barking up the wrong wall. It wasn't. They got it completely wrong. And secondly, for an illustration that's meant to be very humble, everyone's basically right, it's actually quite arrogant. You see, who is it in the illustration that can see the elephant? It's the person giving the illustration, isn't it? So what the person giving the illustration is basically saying is, I have seen what ultimate reality is like, and all the religions of the world are blind. They don't get it, but I have. Which is actually quite arrogant, isn't it? So the illustration kind of breaks down. There are some significant differences between religions, and we need to think about that. But here's the third question that we might want to ask, and that is, what do we mean by the word tolerance? We hear a lot about living in a tolerant society, don't we? Britain is tolerant of different views and ideas. And by the way, I just want to say, I think that's a really good thing. I think it's great we live in a tolerant society where people are free to have different convictions and beliefs. I'd also want to say that I think the fact we live in a tolerant society is one of the fruits of the Christian heritage of this nation. It's certainly not the case, is it, that you have the same freedom all over the world. But sometimes I think we're in danger of redefining tolerance to mean something it never meant. You see, if you tolerate someone, it kind of presupposes you disagree with them, doesn't it? If you have to tolerate them, it means I disagree with you, but I allow you to hold that opinion anyway. If you agree with people, you don't need to tolerate them, you just agree with them. And yet, very often in our culture, we're told that basically tolerance means you have to say everyone is right. Well, that's not tolerance at all. Tolerance assumes that we will have differences of opinion, and it will assume that we can even discuss and disagree on things. And that's a good thing. But it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is right, or that we're right. And here's a fourth question. Can you really get away from exclusive claims, no matter how hard you try? You see, a lot of people look at Christianity and they say the problem with Christianity is it's so arrogant because you claim that you're right and everyone else is wrong. But actually, whatever you believe about religion is going to be, in one sense, exclusive. So you could put it this way. There are basically 4 different views you could have about religions. Here they are. You could say, all religions in the world are correct. Every single one of them. Everybody's right. Or you could say, only some of the religions are correct. Let's get rid of the flying spaghetti monster and some of the more outrageous ones, and we'll just kind of maybe go for the major ones, okay? Some of the religions are right. Or you could say, there's only one correct religion, and it's, well, whatever you happen to think. Or you could say, well, none of the religions are right. They're all wrong, there is no God, there's nothing more than a materialistic universe, that's it. Okay? And a lot of people say, well, how arrogant is option number 3? How arrogant to say that only one religion is right? But if you think about it, if you say that all religions are right, you're saying that those who say that some of them are right, one of them are right, or none of them are right, are wrong. Or if you say that some religions are right, you're saying that the people who say that all religions are right, one of them are right, and none of them are right, are wrong. In fact, whatever you say about religion, you're going to have to basically disagree with someone. It's impossible, isn't it, to agree with everyone all of the time. We can't get away from exclusive claims. And we can never come to a conclusion that doesn't mean we will not disagree with someone, because we will. So what should we do then? If it's not so simple as saying, well, religions are basically the same and all paths will get you to the same goal, what are we to do? Is there an answer? And can we know anything for certain? We're going to explore that in a second, but before that we're going to see another short video clip with a poem that's going to raise that question in a slightly different way. Thanks, Dave.
God, who are you? Do you know me? Can I know you? In temples, gurdwaras, synagogues, shrines, men search endlessly for the divine. They all seem to claim the place you will be. But which leads to you? Am I condemned to be free? Maybe you live in everything I find. Mother Nature, the stars, and the voice in my mind. With crystals, meditation, mindfulness, love. in karma, revelation, or laws from above. Jesus, Muhammad, my ego, the Buddha, the Bible, Quran, Vedas, Talmud, or yoga, bar mitzvah, church service and prayer, rituals and worship that I must compare. So if God exists, how must I begin? And what must I do for favour with him? Sacrifice, worship, good deeds, or free grace, or climbing to heaven on ladders of faith? Am I a part of divine design, or a product of fate, a creation of time? Is there a meaning to this life on earth, or swallow me like a
Christian trying to get their own back to this accusation? But this idea is Jesus, not just being a prophet or a teacher, but being God himself, was there right from the start. And we've got to take that seriously. Because if it's true, then what Jesus claimed about himself is quite different to what any other religious leader has ever claimed. And therefore, we should listen, shouldn't we, to what he says. Put it like this: if Jesus isn't who he claimed to be, then keep searching, because he's a liar and a fraud and you shouldn't believe him. But if he is who he claims to be, then why investigate further the claims of other religious leaders? Because no one has claimed what he has claimed. You've got a greater authority and a greater truth in him than anyone else. So that's the second reason to investigate Jesus. He's unique in what he claims. But here's a third reason to investigate Jesus. He's unique in what he offers. You see, when we think about religion, a lot of us think religion is basically about what we do. It's about earning points with God. It's about obeying rules and regulations and rituals. And if you're not religious, one of the problems you might have with that is what it might lead to. You might think if religion's all about what I do, then I'll either end up a very arrogant and morally self-righteous person, because I'll think I'm better than everyone else, that's why God accepts me, and he doesn't accept you. Or you might end up a very depressed person, because you look at your life and you might say, well, I'm not good enough, God could never accept me, and you live your life in fear and sadness because you think you've not done enough. And either way, whether you're proud or depressed, you're not going to be a great company to everyone else, are you? That's our fear that we have with religion. Someone once said, religion is a two-letter word, D-O. It's about what you do. But actually, Christianity is a four-letter word, D-O-N-E. It's about what Christ has done. See, Christianity is not just about what we can do for God, but what God has done for us in Jesus. It's not about us earning our way to him, because we can't, but it's about him making it possible for us to come to him through what he has done. Jesus living the life we should have lived and dying the death we should have died. Religion might give you the idea of karma, but Jesus gives us this idea of grace. Not that we get what we deserve, but that we can get what we don't deserve. Bono, lead singer in U2, put it this way in an interview once. He said, I'd be in trouble if karma was going to be my judge. It doesn't excuse my mistakes, but I'm holding out for grace. I'm holding out that Jesus took my sins onto the cross because I know who I am, and I hope I don't have to depend on my own religiosity. Jesus offers grace. And the wonderful thing about that is that it leads to quite the opposite to our own religious efforts. If religion can lead to pride or despair, what does this idea of grace lead to? Two things. Firstly, humility. The first step to coming to Jesus is not to think you're better than everyone else and so you deserve it, but it's to actually realize that you're not and that you don't deserve it. The first step to becoming a Christian is to recognize that you need forgiveness. Actually, by the way, that's one of the reasons why a lot of people find it hard to come to Jesus, because it requires humility. But it should mean that the one thing which is incompatible with being a Christian is arrogance. Because no Christian is claiming to be better than anyone else. We're claiming that we're just the same and we need God's forgiveness, and we found it in Jesus. So it shouldn't lead to pride, it should lead to humility, but it shouldn't lead to despair either, it should lead to joy. Why? Because we can face up to our failings and our mistakes, and at the same time know that there is hope. Not because we've done enough, but because Jesus has. So Christians can have real confidence, not self-confidence, but confidence in Jesus, that says that we know that we're forgiven and we know where we're going, and it's not based on our own efforts. Grace is a wonderful thing. And this offer of God's grace shown in Jesus is an offer to everyone. It's not for those who are good enough, it's simply for those who are willing to receive it. Now, I've spoken about this, maybe you might say in theory tonight, but before we have time for questions, what I want to do is interview two people to look at what this might mean in practice. So first, I'm going to invite Sue-Ann to come and join me up at the front. Why don't you give her a round of applause to welcome her up to the front? Great. It's on. We can hear you. Good, great. Sue-Ann, thanks for being willing to share. Tell us firstly, where are you from?
I'm from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long have you been in England?
I've been here for about 3 years in the UK, yeah.
Great, fantastic. So tell us about the kind of religious background of your upbringing and your family.
My family, we practice Taoism. So I know it takes on a lot of variations, but at least within my family, we practice ancestral worship. Mm-hmm. So what we'll do is we'll actually, so once a year, we'll go to the store and we'll buy hell notes. So it's quite scary. So we actually think that our ancestors have gone on to hell. Mm-hmm. And so what we do is we'll burn money just to make sure they've got a good life there.
Wow, so there's a lot of fear involved in that.
I suppose, and absolutely. A lot of respect, I suppose,
yeah. So that's very different kind of cultural and religious backgrounds. And what did you think of Christianity when you were growing up?
I always thought Christianity was a very a Western religion, and I know they pray to a God, and I thought that Jesus was the spokesperson for Christianity.
Okay, so you kind of saw it as something kind of alien, something Western.
Yeah.
But then you actually came to hear about Jesus. How was that? What happened?
So I was 13, and it was my cousin. She was one of the first few Christians in our family. So she told me of Jesus and said, Jesus has died for my sins, and if I choose to believe in him, I can go to heaven and have eternal life. So it's very different from what I was raised to believe, because I always thought, I always had to depend on my family members to ensure that I have a good life after death. But this Jesus is able to offer me eternal life in heaven if I choose to believe in him. So then I slowly just began to read the Bible and understand more about Jesus.
Great. And you actually started to follow Jesus for yourself?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you started to follow Jesus, how did people react to that, maybe in your family and people around you?
Well, in my family, because I was 13 then, and my grandfather was still alive at that time, so it didn't mean that I was disrespecting him, because that would mean that there were certain practices that I would not be able to agree on. So that would, I think it's more pressure for the men in the family than the girls, because that would mean they were not able to provide for him, say after he's gone on after life. So I guess that's the sort of pressure that you might feel.
Yeah, but some people responded more positively as well, didn't they?
Well, at least my mother, she saw a change in me. But yes, I guess it took a while for my older family members to accept that the younger generation tends to, is believing in Jesus.
Yeah. But I guess when you were growing up, you kind of saw Christianity as a kind of Western thing. How would you see it now?
I don't think it is. I think it's a religion. I think Jesus is for everyone, for every culture, for every walk of life. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sue-Ann, for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
Great. If you want to ask her more questions, do later. But I'm going to ask someone else to come up now. Jake, come and join me. Some of you who come here regularly might know Jake. Jake, you're not from a different background. You're from Bournemouth, aren't you?
Yes.
And you are from a Christian family. But you've just been somewhere recently. Where were you?
Yeah, so for the past year I was living in Jordan in the Middle East, and I was working for a charity called Hope and Trust and studying Arabic there.
Great. So I guess being honest, why did you go to Jordan? What were you doing? What was your purpose in going?
Yeah, I guess there were lots of different reasons why I was there. I wanted to understand the refugee asylum seeker situations going on, but I also wanted to share about the good news that I knew in Jesus Christ. And the charity I was working for was a Christian charity who sought to support refugees and asylum seekers, but also to bring them a good news that would give them more than just resettlement to another country. It would give them a hope in a heavenly citizenship.
Great. Some people might say, what right do you have to go out to different culture, different country, you're a Western person, taking your Western ideas and sharing it with people out there? Isn't that a bit kind of arrogant, imposing your ideas on other people?
Yeah, I think, it's a good question. And one which I think I had to wrestle with a lot while I was out there, because there are dynamics there which can make you feel like you're just going there to tell them about Jesus, irrespective of their culture. And you're going there as a white middle-class Westerner to help these people and give them Christianity as well. And I think you do have to be really careful in that. However, I think maybe I was guilty of some of my motives, and then when I arrived there, I just really saw Jesus taught me a lot from the people I met, and I just saw the strength of the Arab church, so what Jesus is doing, irrespective of us Christians out there, and how he's using his spirit just to kind of wipe through there and spread his name, and how people are sharing the gospel amongst themselves. And actually, it's nothing to do with the Western church, but actually he's doing his own thing, and we're just there to play our part when we can.
Does this actually happen? I mean, you were meeting people that had kind of come from different religious backgrounds who come to know Jesus. Did that happen in reality?
Yeah, tons. And what is really encouraging as well, I was just saying that it was really just what Jesus was doing. Not at all what I was doing or other Western Christians were doing. It was just amazing to see how Jesus was moving, and we were just available to him. So I guess a couple of people I knew, so the charity I was working with converts from Islam to Christianity, and Jesus appeared in visions to one guy and his wife. Another guy came to know Christ through just his own intrigue and his own critical thinking about Islam, went along to the local church when moving to Jordan, came to know Christ through discussions with Arab Christians there, and simultaneously his wife had a vision later that week, and they both came to know Christ in that week, which is incredible. And another guy was in the depths of despair in prison and came to know Christ in that situation. And all of them are still going on with the Lord. And it's just really encouraging just to see what God's doing there, not necessarily through Western Christians, but in his own way.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And again, do chat to Jake. I think you're going into Cypher later to speak to some of the young people. But I think it just helps us to see that Christianity is not white, Western, or middle class. And it never originally was white, Western, or middle class. And Jesus is for everyone. In fact, the places in the world where the church is growing most rapidly today are places like Nepal and Iran and Afghanistan. Not places that we would culturally associate with cultural Christianity, but places where people have come to discover not a religion, but a person who reveals to them God, Jesus Christ. It is exclusive in one sense, but also you might say it's wonderfully inclusive. It's for everyone. Now I wonder what you think. We're going to have a break for 5 minutes. That's not a break to kind of run off, but that's a break to chat to those next to you if you want, to text in your questions. There's going to be some music play for just a few minutes, just to give you a chance to do that. If you don't want to text in, but you want to do it kind of anonymously, you just take that feedback form that's on your chairs, and you'll see at the end there's a any questions bit. So you can tear that off, you can write down your question. There'll be a few folks running around to collect those in a couple of minutes. And then we're going to just answer those questions for about 15 minutes or so before we finish the formal part. So do feel free to chat. If you can't think of a question, ask the person next to you for a question, and we'll look at them in a minute. Great.
I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're right, and I've heard the tender whisper of love in the dead of night when you tell me you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good Father. That's who you are. That's who you are. That's who you are. And I'm loved by you. That's who I am. That's who I am. That's who I am. And I see many searching for answers far and wide, but I know that we're all searching for answers. Only you provide, 'cause you know just what we need before we say your words. You're a good, good Father. That's who you are. That's who you are. That's who you are. And I'm loved by you. That's who I am. That's who I am. Who I am. You're a good, good Father. That's who you are. That's who you are. That's who you are. And I'm loved by you. That's who I am. That's who I am. Who I am. For you are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. That's who you are. For you are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. That's who you are.
Can I just ask if there are any more questions? If you've got a question that you've written down, if you could just pop your hand up and the guys will just finish collecting. We've got a few that have come in, which are great. So thank you to all those who've texted and written questions in.
Great.
Okay, here we go. First question that's come in, what happens to all those people of other religions who don't ever hear about Jesus? They're moral and seek God in their own way.
Okay. So I guess you could almost say there's two questions wrapped up in that. Firstly, what about people in other religions who are kind of moral and seek God in their own way? And then particularly, what about those who don't get the opportunity to hear about Jesus? Okay? So I'm going to break it down into those two. Firstly, it does seem rather arrogant, doesn't it, to say, God says to someone, you might be moral, you might be a nice person, but just because you didn't become a Christian, then you're rejected, you're condemned. Sounds unfair. God doesn't reject us because we tick the wrong box on the census form. We ticked is Muslim rather than Christian. And the thing that separates us from God is not our religion, as it were, but the Bible says our sin. That's just to use the technical word for the wrong stuff we do. Now, if it was possible to overcome that barrier of the wrong stuff that separates me from God through my own efforts, through being religious, through trying really hard, then in one sense you could say what Jesus did was unnecessary. He didn't need to die on the cross. He just needed to say, try harder. Look at the other religions and copy them. But I think it's because actually Jesus knew that our moral efforts were not enough, that we had to have a solution that was outside of ourselves. We needed forgiveness. And so Jesus is saying, actually, you can't do enough, but I'm going to do enough for you. And I'm going to offer that to everyone who are willing to receive that gift. If other ways were possible, then Jesus was unnecessary. But I think it's because they weren't that Jesus is necessary. But what about those who don't get to hear? I think that's kind of second part to the question. Because it's all very well, you might say, for people who do get the chance to explore. And certainly if you live in Britain, it doesn't matter what your religious background, you have lots of opportunity, don't you, to discover Jesus. And actually, I think people in other countries might have more than we think through internet and through television and stuff like that. But there are clearly other people who won't ever really get to hear about Jesus. Does God just say, well, I'm sorry, you were just born in the wrong place? Doesn't seem very fair. Well, the Bible doesn't explicitly answer the question of what happens to people like that, partly because the Bible doesn't answer every possible question we could ask, but every question we need to know the answer to. And if you're asking that question, it's always going to be a kind of secondary question, isn't it? It's never going to be personal to you, because you've obviously heard. But I think it does give us some kind of indication of what might be the answer. In the book of Romans in the New Testament, in the first 2 chapters, it tells us of 2 things that everyone in the world knows, regardless of their background or whether they've read the Bible or heard of Jesus. Firstly, everyone can know something of God's existence through creation, through the world around. We might try and suppress that and ignore it, but it's there, it's self-evidence. That's why there's never been a completely atheistic culture in the world. We have this awareness of something more. And the second thing that we're told is that everybody has a conscience. We all have an inbuilt sense of right and wrong. That's again why every culture in the world has some idea of morality. We may not agree on everything, but there's something implicit, isn't there? Regardless of whether you've had a religious upbringing or not. So if we can be aware that there is something more, that there is a God out there, and if we can be aware of our own guilt, we might use that word, if we're aware of those 2 things, we have a question, don't we, of what we're going to do about it. Are we going to try in our own efforts to overcome those things and make our way to God? Or could we trust in God to be gracious to us and forgiving? And I guess you could ask the question, could it be possible for someone who hasn't explicitly heard about Jesus to trust in God's forgiveness, even though they don't exactly know how that could come about? And could God apply to them what Jesus has done, even though they don't know as much as we do? And I would want to say, I think maybe that is possible. I don't want to be too dogmatic on it, because I think it's going beyond exactly explicitly what the Bible says. But it's kind of taking what we do know and trying to think that through. I think certainly what we'd have to say is, on the day of judgment, no one's going to say to God, that's not fair. It certainly does say that everybody will be accountable for what they did with what they do know, rather than what they didn't know. And it also seems to indicate that God will not only know what we did with the situation we're in, but also what we would have done if we were in a different situation too. So I think those kind of things help me to trust that God is fair. But, as I said, it's not a personal question for us in the sense that we can know, and we have to make up our minds what we're going to do with it.
It's very dangerous to put forward our own views as to what God is thinking. What we don't know, but God is just.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Mossy. Next question we've had, and just to say that we have had a number of questions that are similar, so we've blocked them all in under the same sort of title. So if you think that was my question, but it doesn't sound quite right, we've merged some of them for time's sakes. The second question, what would you say to someone who doesn't see any reason or need to look into Christianity? And that's probably very much linked to your last one, but it is something that's very real that we hear.
So I guess in Western culture, apathy is probably the prevalent view people have when it comes to religion. Why does it matter? Is it really important? Why do I need it? Some people come to investigate Christianity through some kind of personal crisis. Maybe an awareness of their own guilt, maybe it's a bereavement or the reality of death that forces you to ask big questions. And life has a habit of throwing up things like that to make you ask those big questions. You don't have to ask for it to happen, it just does. But I kind of think it's a shame to wait for those kind of things to happen before you ever start to ask those big questions. Wouldn't it be better to kind of investigate the big questions before life falls apart or it comes to an end? Wouldn't it be better to think about it now? Partly because Christianity might not just be about life after death, it might also be about life before death. And you might be missing out on what you could have now, not just what might happen in the future. So I would say, yes, you could go down the subjective line of our needs, but even if we feel we have no needs, the issue is this. Either Jesus is who he claimed to be and did what the Bible claims he did, or he isn't and he didn't. And if he is and if he did, in other words, if he is God and if he did rise from the dead, then that's pretty big, isn't it? And wouldn't it be worth thinking that through? And if he didn't and he isn't, then actually it's a load of rubbish. We should close down our churches, we should stop the building project down in Lansdowne right now, because the whole thing's a waste of time. It's just based on a fabrication and a lie. But it is of that kind of nature and magnitude. It's really important. It's not just whether you feel you need it, it's either true or it's not. So I would say, don't wait till you feel you have a need, but actually investigate whether it's true, and then think through what the implications might be. And also, I think you'll find it does meet our deepest needs as well. Okay?
And in searching and exploring, you said earlier about look at the evidence. And obviously there's a lot of evidence within the Bible. What about outside of the Bible? Is there any evidence of Jesus' existence and what he did?
Yeah, so is it just in the Bible? Is it outside the Bible as well? Clearly, if you want to know most about Jesus, you want to look at the New Testament. You've got 4 independent accounts of his life. We call them the Gospels. And so if you really want to look at Jesus, start there. That'd be a great place to look. And we've got good reasons for thinking that they're reliable that I haven't got time to go into tonight, but I'll happily chat about in a minute. But they're not the only accounts or the only mentions of Jesus. We have mentions of Jesus in other historical accounts, Tacitus, a guy called Pliny, a Jewish historian called Josephus, who all reference Jesus in what they write about. Now, they don't obviously go into as much detail because their primary purpose was not to record the life of Jesus, but to record history in the Roman Empire, and they referred to Jesus as it kind of came up. We might ask the question, why is there not more? And there's a few reasons why that might be the case. Firstly, Galilee, where Jesus did most of his ministry, was a bit of a backwater in terms of the Roman world. This wasn't the centre of Rome, so that was less likely to draw the attention of Roman historians. But also, it's worth thinking, just as Christians had a vested interest in wanting to talk about Jesus, if you had rejected Jesus, you probably had a vested interest in not wanting to talk about him and keeping it quiet. No one's neutral when it comes to Jesus. And so the silence is also a kind of powerful thing that we need to think about too. Everything we know outside of the Bible certainly confirms and backs up what we have in the Bible. Can't back up everything, but it gives us a good way to go. But don't reject the Bible just because it's the Bible either. There's good reasons for thinking that's reliable as well. Okay?
Yeah, that's great. Now, Jesus obviously he lived on earth in the time span he did, but where does the Old Testament fit in? You've said a number of times, go to the Gospels, which are part of the New Testament.
Yeah.
Where do we see, does Christ appear in the Old Testament?
Okay, and I guess connected to that, you might ask the question, if Jesus only came 2,000 years ago, what about all the people in the Old Testament? As in, were they just unlucky because they were born in the wrong time? Are all the people who lived for actually a majority of Earth's history before Jesus in a worse position than us? Well, one of the things that Jesus himself said, and you can read about this in John's Gospel, chapter 5, is that all of the Old Testaments, the books written before Jesus, they were all pointing towards him, and they were all about him. In fact, his criticism of the religious leaders of his day were that they had studied the Old Testament and they'd missed the main point, which was him. And so the Bible, in one sense, is a book that points towards Jesus. The New Testament points back to him. It was written after him, but the Old Testament pointed forward to him. It was written before him, but it pointed towards the one that was going to come. So just as Christians today can look back and trust in what Jesus did, in one sense you could say people before Jesus had the ability to look forwards, expecting what God was going to do. Now, clearly their understanding was not as great as our understanding is. They didn't know everything that was going to happen. But the great thing about being a Christian is it's not about passing a theological exam. It's not like, now I've got this much theological knowledge, I'm ready to become a Christian. It's really about trusting God. And that means that actually, even though their understanding might have been less, their trust in God could have been just the same, and their destination could have been the same as well. So I think it doesn't matter whether it's before or after, it's all pointing towards that.
So a real centre point in history.
Yeah.
Those,
which of course our dates confirm in some ways to the West. Yeah.
The next question, how do we explain the fact that there are so many denominations in the Christian faith? Is there a right one? And why do we have so many different ones?
Yeah, well, it's clearly Baptist. No. I read recently somewhere that there are 33,000 denominations of the Christian church around the world. Not churches, but denominations of churches, which means, by the way, in an average lifespan, if you went to a different church denomination every Sunday, you still wouldn't have visited them all before you die, which is a bit depressing, isn't it? Why are there so many different churches if Christianity is true? In one sense, I would say, if Christianity is true, it's not surprising that there are different churches, because it shows that it's not some big political organisation with centralised leadership coming down from one kind of government office or something like that. Sadly, often in history, Christianity has become politicised, and that's often been a bad thing for Christianity. But for the first 300 years, it wasn't. It was just a movement of people who loved Jesus. So the fact that we have different people worshipping in different kind of ways, expressing their faith in Jesus in cultural contexts different to our own is a great thing. We can sing different songs. We can do it in different ways. We don't have to agree on everything. And the fact we don't agree on everything is also not necessarily a big problem. There are some things in the Bible that are fundamental and similar. I work a lot with Christian unions, groups of Christian students in universities from different denominations, but they come together and say, look, we might disagree over when you should baptize someone, or what we mean by this particular verse of the Old Testament, or things like that. But we agree on who Jesus is and what it means to follow him. So there can be differences of opinion on secondary issues, but agreement on the central issues. I guess it's also worth saying this, though. There is a tendency with anything, but particularly as we look back through the history of Christianity, that people can lose sight of Jesus and build their life more on tradition than the person of Jesus. And so often what we see through history is that people lose sight of the Bible and they lose sight of Jesus, and they start to develop traditions which have nothing really to do with Jesus at all, and the Bible never teaches. And so that's why it's really important to always check what a church teaches, including this one, and any church, and say, well, does that fit with what the Bible says? And are they following Jesus, or are they just following their traditions? And sadly, sometimes churches have moved so far away from what the Bible says that in one sense, although they're called a church, you might technically say, well, they're not really a church in the true sense of the word. You know, if you go down into Lansdowne area, you'll see a fire station. But it's not actually a fire station, is it? It's a nightclub. It says fire station, but its purpose is quite different. And in some ways, just because it says church, well, what is a church according to the Bible? It's a group of people who love Jesus and follow him according to the Bible. And so we need to check that that's actually what's happening. But the fact there are differences doesn't mean it's not true. And the fact that there are, I guess, what you might call kind of things that look like churches but are not, doesn't mean that there isn't real stuff out there. You don't get fake 2p pieces. That's because 2p is not worth very much. You do get fake £50 notes because £50 is valuable. And it's because I think that people recognise that there is something valuable about the true church that there are distortions and sometimes cults that spring up trying to take something, but just because it's a fake doesn't mean that there isn't something that's genuine or real as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Moxie. We've got our last question. We've had a number of questions that we haven't got time to go through tonight. What we'll try and do is to get those onto the website to actually put the questions that were asked that we haven't answered. But the last one we've got for this evening is, what is sin and where is hell?
I'm glad that we saved the easy one till last. What is sin and where is hell? I guess one of the problems with both the word sin and the word hell is that it's not just Christians that talk about those words, is it? I remember once I was in Laos, neighbouring to Thailand. I was in a Buddhist temple, and I was talking to a Buddhist monk, and he was telling me all about hell. There were some very vivid pictures on the wall, and he was describing this, and it really made me think, hang on a minute, this guy's a Buddhist, and yet he's talking about hell. Obviously, what he means by that word is very different to what I would think as a Christian. So what do we mean by those words? Well, firstly, when the Bible talks about sin, it's not just talking about sex. Often people think, it's about kind of sexual stuff, or it's just about alcohol and kind of nasty stuff like that. But it's basically saying, before it's an action, it's an attitude. It's an attitude that says to God, I want to live my life my way. And we can express that in lots of ways. Sometimes in lots of kind of very, maybe we say immoral ways. But we might also express it in some very self-righteous ways. But it's basically living independently from God without reference to him. And the Bible says actually we all do that in different ways. None of us naturally are connected to God. All of us have that broken relationship. And ultimately, that separation starts now, and it says if it's not sorted out, it will go on for eternity. And so the Bible, when it talks about hell, that's really the English word that we use to translate various words in the Bible, in particular in the New Testament, a Greek word called Gehenna. It was a place outside Jerusalem, and Jesus used that valley, that physical place, as a kind of metaphor, a place of separation, a place of judgment. And he said, actually, our sin, our wrong is really serious because it leads to serious implications. It will separate you from God now, and it will do beyond death as well. Now, of course, that raises all sorts of questions. What is hell like? Where is it? Is it eternal? Is it conscious? Clearly, the Bible is using metaphor often. It talks about darkness, but it talks about fire at the same time, and obviously they don't normally go together. But clearly, it's metaphors for something that's not good, and it's really serious. And what I would say, though, is this. Christianity is good news because it's not saying you're all condemned, but it's saying through Jesus, anyone can be forgiven. Yeah, that relationship is broken, but through Jesus it can be mended. Yet hell is in one sense what we deserve, but it's not what we have to face if we trust in him. The only thing that God won't do when it comes to helping us to avoid hell is he won't override our will and force upon us something we choose to reject. If we say to God throughout our lives, God, I'm not interested, I don't want your forgiveness, I don't want you, God won't force upon us what we've chosen to reject, because actually heaven wouldn't be heaven if it was compulsory anyway. But he does say, look, I offer it to you free. Jesus died to take the hell you deserve. He took our sin, our wrong upon himself, and we don't have to, and all you need to do is receive that as a gift. That's great news.
And not only an eternal fulfillment, but also fulfillment of our lives here on earth.
Yeah.
And to live as he wants us to live.
Fantastic.
So, Michael, thanks very much indeed for answering on the spot. That's excellent. If I can just... Sorry,
before you wrap up, just a couple more things to say, sorry. Maybe you're here tonight and you're thinking, well, I'm kind of not sure what I think about this. I'm guessing in a room like this, there are different kind of opinions, particularly if you're kind of still exploring Christianity. I'm guessing there are some people here, and you might be thinking, well, this is all very fascinating, but I don't think it's true. I don't agree, and I certainly don't sign up to any of this stuff. If that is your opinion, if that's still your opinion, can I say, firstly, well, thank you for coming. It's great that you've come, and it's great that you're willing to kind of think about this, even if it was just for the cakes beforehand and you've tolerated the stuff afterwards. There'll be more cakes later, by the way, as a thank you for coming. But even if you have, it's great that you've come. But can I challenge you, though, if you're going to reject this, to make sure you first investigate it. Look into it for yourself. Next door, where the cakes are, there's also a table, there's various books. There are some accounts of the life of Jesus. The books are just called Uncover. It's the account of Jesus' life written by a medical doctor, a historian called Luke. Why not pick one of those up and read about it? Because before you reject something, it'd be worth investigating one of the eyewitness sources, one of the source documents, and then make up your mind whether it's rubbish or not. And at very least, at the end of the investigation, you'll be a better informed atheist, but you might find that your opinions change. I warn you, there are people in your situation that have done just that and they found they did. So I challenge you to give it a go. Secondly, you might be here and you're saying, well, actually, I'm still confused and I need to look into this more. And certainly, particularly if tonight's the very first thing you've really thought about on this topic, I'm not surprised that maybe you've got all sorts of questions. And Pete will tell you later about an opportunity that we've got where you can investigate those questions further and you can think about them more. And we really want to give you an opportunity to do that. Or it might be that you're saying, actually, if it really is a case of not earning my way to God, but receiving a gift, and if that's what God offers to me, then I want to receive that gift. Well, in a moment, I want to just tell you how you could do that for those who might be in that situation. But just before we really do wrap up, I've asked Nathaniel, who's a good friend of mine. Nathaniel and Navs came down from South Wales today. They've done all the lighting, just to sing a short song. He actually wrote this song himself. That just gives us an opportunity for a couple of minutes just to reflect on what you've heard, to think it through, and then in a moment we'll just wrap things up. But just enjoy and maybe take the time to think through what you've heard. Thanks.
So I've heard about this Jesus guy, came to die and rise to life. Do I believe it? Do you believe it? Surely not about this Jesus guy, always vying for my life. Do I really need it? Do I really need it? But I can't help but feel my heart stir while I get to grips with the things I've heard. A man who died to save the lost, paid the ultimate cost. After 3 days passed, his promises held fast. A light that kicked dark till it bled, that after death we'd rise again. Can all of this really be? Can Jesus set me free? Could it really be that Jesus lives? Would it really mean I'm caught in sin? Do I believe it? Do I believe it? But I can't help but feel my heart stir while I get to grips with the things I've heard. A man who died to save the lost, paid the ultimate cost. After 3 days passed, his promises held first. A light that kicked dark till it bled, that after death we'd rise again. Can all of this really be? Can Jesus set me free? Whoa! I see a light up ahead, victory over death. A man who died to save the lost, paid the ultimate cost. After 3 days passed, his promises held fast. A light that kicked dark till it bled, after death we'd rise again. Can all of this really be? Yeah, Jesus set me free. Oh, oh, oh. Yeah, Jesus set me free.
Thanks so much, Nathaniel. So how do you receive that gift? How do you respond to that invitation? There might be some people who have been thinking about that. Maybe tonight's not the first time you've heard about this. Well, there are three simple words that you learn pretty early on in life that might help. The words sorry, thank you, and please. And they're actually words that are involved in coming to receive the gift that Jesus brings. The first word, sorry, is important because it recognizes that we need his forgiveness. It recognizes that actually we are cut off from him. It recognizes that actually we have often lived without him. We need to say sorry. We also need to say thank you because Christianity is a gift. It's about forgiveness. And we need to thank the one who offers it to us. That's normally how you receive a gift, isn't it? Just with the word thank you. And then the word please. It's really a request saying, God, please forgive me. Please come into my life. Please help me to get started with you. Sorry, thank you, please. And maybe there's some here that would be ready to say that to God as a way of getting started, of being included in this wonderful offer that we've looked at tonight. If you are in that situation, then let me just say, at the end, I've got some little booklets called Yes. They're really for people who are in that situation of saying, well, I want to say yes, or I'm thinking about saying yes to Jesus. I'd love to give one to you. I'll be wandering around. I might even be going over to get a cake because I've not had any yet. But if you want to get one of those off me, do grab one. They're absolutely free. But you could read that as you get home tonight and think through that. And actually, it will help you think about how you could make that step for yourself. But actually for all of us, and just before Pete comes, you might have torn off the question bit of this, and that's okay. But hopefully you've still got the other parts, which says thank you for coming, and we really mean that. We really appreciate it, particularly if you've not been before. What we'd love you to do is leave some comments. So if you could just grab that, can you grab that now? If you've still got it around, hopefully you've not chewed it up or thrown it across the room. And then grab a pen. And you can do this anonymously if you want. So you don't have to leave us your details if you don't want to. So you can tell us what you thought of the evening, what you'd like in future. We can't promise to incorporate all the suggestions, but it does help us to know what people think and how we can do it better, because we'll do these, we hope, each month. So, leave some comments. But then, if you want to find out more, maybe you'd be interested in asking more questions, maybe you're new and you think about what else is on to help you explore, then just tick where it says, I'd like to know more, and then leave us your name and your number. What will happen is a friendly person from the church will just get in touch sometime this week. They'll let you know about what's going on. If you want to meet up for a coffee and find out more, you can. There'll be no pressure. We won't put you on a mailing list for the next 10 years or anything like that. But we will help you find out more, okay? So just leave the comments, tick the I want to find out more if that applies to you, leave your details, and then there'll be boxes wonderfully being displayed by Tom down at the front here, and Gav, thank you. They'll be at the exits as you leave, so don't take them home with you, put them in the boxes. It'd be great if you could all just fill it out, and then it'll help us in future, okay? So just do that now. As Pete comes back, just to wrap things up. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you, Michael. So for those who think, yeah, I'd like to look into this a little bit more, one thing that we are doing here at Lansdowne is we're having a big questions extra evenings that start 6 Monday evenings starting from the 2nd of November, starting at 7:30. Each evening starts with a meal and then an opportunity to explore a topic that may be real love, where can it be found, real forgiveness, how could the past be wiped clean. So a whole number of different issues that will help you to answer some of the questions that you may have. So a real opportunity there. There are leaflets around the church, so look out for that one. And certainly the quality of the food that is offered is excellent. Excuse me. So certainly a good evening. You may have questions still. Certainly ask those you've come with or at the welcome point if there's anything that you want to know. There are a number of people walking around with the big questions lanyards on. If you want to, certainly they're there. You can just have a chat with them, and they'll be only too happy to give you some time. There is a bookstall, Michael's mentioned, in the hall. There's a number of books that are available that go further, really, in giving you an opportunity to read a little bit further on what we've heard tonight. a book here from just a couple, but one by Michael Green, Don't All Religions Lead to God? So again, a bit more depth to what Michael's been speaking about earlier. And then the other book by Nabil Qureshi, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, about a devout Muslim who encountered Christianity in his search. So 2 books that certainly would be well recommended. The other thing is we are continuing on this series, the Big Question series. We're going to be running it for a number of Sundays, the first Sunday of each month in the evening. The next one is on the 1st of November, and the subject is Distant and Uncaring, Would a God of Love Allow Suffering? So again, an opportunity to really challenge Michael and bring questions to him. But that concludes our formal part of the evening, and there is now more tea and cake put on by Nikki and her team, so you're very welcome to stay, chat, and just enjoy the evening a little bit more. But thank you to everyone. Thank you to Michael for answering the questions on the spot, and thank you to everyone for coming along tonight. And we hope you found it a very challenging and enjoyable evening. Thank you.